An undead has come to play.
This review is sponsored by NatureBox. For great tasting health snacks, please visit naturebox.com/rev3games to get half off your first box. All right, if there's one game that could be released on the same day as Titanfall, I would have to think it would be a Dark Souls game. It has a very particular audience, it's a very distinctly different game, and it's one that, given its cult following, can probably stand up to a behemoth release such as Titanfall. Just so you know, I have not personally reviewed this game. I am reading the review from my dear friend and colleague from X-Play, Matt Kyle, who was one of the few people I knew who had the skill and the time to get through the game. So here we go, Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 is the third highly challenging action RPG that From Software has given us, if you consider Demon Souls to be the spiritual successor to Dark Souls, and I'd say it's reasonable to do so. There was some concern over this game due to the director of the first two, Hidetaka Miyazaki, not being involved, as well as claims that it would be, quote, more accessible, which a lot of fans read as meaning, quote, dumbed down. While those concerns were understandable, most Dark Souls fans will find that Dark Souls 2 is more of what they love, while offering newcomers a less intimidating way to step into the series.
Long ago, in a walled-off land far to the north.
Dark Souls 2 was set in a land called Drang Lake, which has definitely seen better days. It's now in ruins and full of monsters, demons, and really creepy old ladies.
This is the fate of the cursed.
As a cursed undead, your only chance of escaping said curse is to kill tons of things and take their souls, with the assumption that collecting bigger souls will result in some form of progress. Many of the characters you'll meet seem to have played the previous Dark Souls, because they certainly know how the game works.
Seek souls. Larger, more powerful souls.
Dark Souls 2 is a tad light on the narrative, but all the story needs to be is a hook on which to hang the dungeon crawling, so that's okay. Drang Lake is full of quirky and memorable characters, many of whom will help out by serving as vendors in the main town hub. They don't have a lot to say in many cases, but they add a welcome extra texture to the setting, and some of them are wonderfully strange without any explanation, such as the talking cat that runs one of the shops.
Ooh, you smell wonderful.
There's a lot of variety in Drang Lake's landscape. Yes, much time is spent in the crumbling ruins and dungeons, but it's pleasing to also be treated to vistas ranging from beautiful seaside cliffs to this place, which is what I assume Hayao Miyazaki dreams about when he has a high fever. As in its predecessor, the level design is extraordinary, with almost every area intertwined and connected in various ways with other areas, creating clever shortcuts and geographical consistency throughout the game. Bonfires serve as safe restoration points and fast travel nodes, so the vast locations never become a chore to traverse once thoroughly explored.
You have that distinct scent, the smell of irreversible fate.
Dark Souls has a reputation for being one of the hardest games around, and that's something of an unfair description. Once you know what you're doing in an area or against a particular boss, it's pretty simple. The challenge comes from the fact that the most common form of feedback the player gets is a quick and brutal death, and the game will gladly continue to communicate this message until the player figures out what he or she is doing wrong. Dark Souls 2 does make a few concessions in the realm of accessibility, which is not to say it's easier or dumbed down for casuals, but it seems less actively interested in leaving the player dead in the water early on. It's much more difficult to wander into a high-level area at the beginning of the game due to slightly less ambiguous level design, and life gems are plentiful for the most part. It's very hard to end up in a situation in which your only options are to grind for hours or start over, and that's a good thing. The early learning curve has been pleasantly lessened just enough to make it more approachable. But fear not, later on, Dark Souls 2 is perfectly happy to let you completely miss whole areas and end up facing enemies far beyond your current abilities. If there's a shortcoming to the game, it's that's where Dark Souls 1 played tough but fair. Dark Souls 2 has a mildly janky, almost slippery quality to how some of the enemies move, especially the bosses. In the previous game, hit detection was practically a hard science, and you could count on the game to play fair in that arena. Dark Souls 2 has a problem with bosses sliding around the terrain a bit in order to auto-target you more effectively, occasionally getting tagged by attacks that really shouldn't have connected. The lock-on also has a woefully short range, and you have to get absurdly close to enemies to focus the camera on them. Ranged attacks can be aimed on a vertical arc, but it's imprecise at best and leaves you fumbling with the controls while enemy archers rain down death from a far greater distance. Of course, in a game in which you die this often, does that matter? Well, yes, it does matter, in the sense that the Souls games trade on frustration, but it's frustration with the self. Satisfaction in Dark Souls should come from conquering my own failings and handling a situation in the game, not throwing myself against a boss until you get a fight where he doesn't slip out of his pattern to hit me in what may be a way of upping difficulty or maybe just sloppy design. Put simply, if I'm being honest with myself, just about every death in Dark Souls 1 was my fault, due to either ignorance or ineptitude. In Dark Souls 2, an alarming number of deaths feel like the game isn't playing by its own rules. It's the wrong kind of frustration.
I fear that by now, they may have scarce room in their hearts for miracles.
So, you might be asking, where's the appeal if the game is so willing to push the player's rage button repeatedly? Well, let me tell you a quick story. Years ago, in the early 2000s, EverQuest was released on the PlayStation 2, and a friend played it for the first time while sending updates about it on Instant Messenger. While playing Dark Souls 2, something he said back then was continually running through my brain. He said, "My entire character could fit inside this snake's head, yet I am still tempted to poke it with a knife." That is the hook of Dark Souls 2, the absolute compulsion to see what's around the next corner, to see if you can beat that horrible creature across the room, to survive the next player who invades your game, to know what's on the other side of the next mist door. The feeling of discovery is like nothing else out there, and it's the knowledge that the next step could very likely kill you that keeps you on edge, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, you can handle the next challenge and survive that keeps you pushing forward. To poke something with a knife that you really should not be poking with a knife and come out of it victorious. That's an achievement, and Dark Souls 2 lets you achieve that countless times. To make a thrill ride out of something that has to be played so methodically is a rare accomplishment.
You must go on a journey without rest.
Dark Souls 2 may not be the masterpiece that Dark Souls 1 was, but there's still nothing else quite like it at this level of presentational quality. It's a truly immense game, easily an 80-hour first playthrough for most people. That sense of discovery permeates the entire experience and keeps pushing you forward late into the night. Afterward, lying awake, thinking about that boss you can't beat, or that area that just had to have one more secret door tucked away in it, eager to try it again in the morning. A 4 out of 5.
You're undead, aren't you?
All right, there you have it. I bet some of you are still wondering, especially those who have never tried a Dark Souls game, should I try this game? I think this is the one, despite its flaws, that will probably get you better understanding the logic of the series. It might actually make it easier to go to Dark Souls 1 if that has always looked like kind of something off in the distance that you're not too certain if you're willing to invest yourself in. So there you have it, Dark Souls 2. Obviously there's another big review up this week, that's Titanfall. Yeah, could not be any different. If you like to see the contrast, please go check out that review. Comments are below. Ta-ta. So I mentioned this before, I like to have a particular dietary regimen when I'm taking on games that kind of require the amount of attention and the amount of time as Dark Souls 2. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to our sponsor for this review, NatureBox. NatureBox will send you monthly a box full of healthy and very tasty goodies, including dried Fuji apples, blueberry almond bites, whole wheat apple pie figgy bars, peppery pistachios, and harvest rice sticks. That's just a sampling. You also get barbecue kettle kernels, everything bagel sticks, South Pacific plantain chips, over 100 more, and they're sent right to your door. And it's got free shipping anywhere in the US. Subscriptions start at $19.95 a month. Try NatureBox right now and get 50% off your first box by going to naturebox.com/Rev3Games. That's naturebox.com/Rev3Games.